call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order. This morning we have with us the Department of Internal Services to discuss alternative procurement process. Would like to remind all members to place their phones on silent. We'll begin with introductions, starting with Mr. McKay.
Hugh McKay, MLA for Chester St. Margaret's.
Chuck Porter, MLA for Hants West.
Benjamin Justin, Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Good morning, Suzanne Lonas-Croft, MLA Lunenburg.
Gordon Wilson, MLA for Clare Digby.
Good morning, my name is Tim Houston, I'm the MLA for Pictou East.
Good morning, Dave Wilson, MLA for Sackville-Cobequid.
Lisa Roberts, MLA for Halifax Needham.
Alan McMaster, MLA for Inverness, your chair. We have with us the Auditor General's office this morning, beginning with Ms. Richardson.
Ashley Richardson, Audit Principal.
Andrew Atherton, Assistant Auditor General.
And let us introduce our guests. We're going to start on the right with Mr. Mitchell.
Chris Mitchell, the Chief Procurement Officer.
I'll get you to try that again with your mic lit up.
Chris Mitchell, Chief Procurement Officer.
Good morning, Jeff Conant. I'm the Deputy Minister at Internal Services.
Good morning, I'm Sandra Cascade, the CIO for the province and the Associate Deputy Minister for Internal Services.
Good morning, I'm Kevin Brion, Executive Director of Business Solutions.
Okay, we'll begin with your introduction, and I think Mr. Conrad, are you providing the opening comments? Mr. Conrad.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks so much for having us this morning. We're glad to be here, talk about some of the work that we do at the Department of Internal Services. Most of you know that we're kind of a central group in the province that transactions a lot of the back end, what's considered the back end function of government. So we do about 1 million financial transactions a year. We do our internal audit function. We manage major purchases. We handle information technology services. So quite a range of back end functions inside of the government. We've consolidated, streamlined, and generated a lot of efficiencies by consolidation within government, and we've provided you with some materials like some timelines and some information related to some of that consolidation. We've worked specifically on the IT side, and we've taken a lot of what we think are good innovative solutions and long-term approaches to gain sustainability of government over the longer period of time. It is, of course, a journey to try and get ourselves to the right place, but we continue on that journey, and we think we're headed towards the right direction in terms of a lot of the work that we've been asked to do. We really believe that the work that we do behind the scenes is really important in allowing other departments to be freed up to do what they focus on. So part of the philosophy of this work is that we should try to be as good as we can at the work that we do in order to take it off the hands of other line departments that are really focused on other critical services like education and health or social services or other things in that area of work. As you can imagine, there's a rapid pace of change in the world in which we live, both in terms of technology and in terms of government services. So it's, one of our ongoing challenges to get the right services in the right place at the right time, and to make sure that we're doing things like protecting privacy and ensuring cost effectiveness and dealing with cybersecurity and a whole range of other fronts. So it's quite a broad, complicated piece of work that we've been handed to do. We need to continually maintain and upgrade those services, and of course procurement plays a key function in terms of how we do that work. So how do we manage the procurement function on a go-forward basis is really critical. I know we're here today to talk about alternate procurement, but about 80% of the work that we do through the cost value of the work that we do in government goes through a competitive process, and about 20% of the work we do goes through some sort of an alternative procurement process. So it's usually and we'll talk more about this I'm sure, but in an urgent, specialized, or exceptional circumstance that we use alternate procurement, and it is governed by a number of trade agreements like the Atlantic Procurement Agreement, the Canada Free Trade Agreement, a number of other things which recognize these alternate procurement processes as a set part of procurement. So it is a procurement process. It's not in lieu of procurement. It is a type of a procurement process. We've done a number of things to help try and bring some clarity to this. So last year we modernized our procurement policy. So in October of 2016 we released a new procurement policy that talks about a whole range of things in procurement, including alternate procurement, and provides some greater clarity around that. We've of course done a number of things internally around staff training and supports to folks and trying to improve the processes where we offer advice and guidance to other departments. And again, I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about those things. For me, at the heart of this work is always the great staff that we have in our department and across government trying their best to do this work and do it well. So we have a wonderful team at Procurement. We have a wonderful team in our Information Communications and Technology Services. You see some of the senior leaders here today, but none of us would get to do the work we do without a great team behind us that every day does wonderful work, wins awards, gets recognized for the work that they do nationally and internationally. So it's a really exciting time to be in this work. We absolutely acknowledge there's lots of work to be done, but it is an exciting time to be leading on some of these things within a government context. So thank you very much for having us this morning. I look forward to the discussion and glad to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Conrad. We'll move to the PC Caucus. Mr. Houston, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opening comments. Internal Services plays a major role in IT service delivery. Is it the only provider of IT service delivery? Are you guys responsible for everything, or are there any departments that do their own? Mr. Conrad?
So inside of government, I always struggle with this a little bit because it depends on how you define IT and who's making the definition. So kind of the core IT services, and I'll certainly let Sandra, the CIO, talk a little bit, but we provide the bulk of those services. Some departments continue to have services like analytical services and people running reports, and using IT systems, of course, as users is an important part of what they do. And then on the health side, we provide a piece of the IT services for the IWK and the Nova Scotia Health Authority, but we have what we call the non-clinical part, and the health authorities have maintained responsibility for the clinical services on the health side.
So you provide the bulk?
We provide the bulk.
And on the procurement side, like, would an individual department procure its own computer, but you would procure the systems that run on the computer, or what's the distinction there?
So the distinction there would be we run the sort of strategic large picture procurement pieces. Most of the buyers of things are out in the department. So if someone's buying a computer, they're doing that through the department, but setting up the contract under which you buy the computers would be work that we would be engaged in. So again, we're providing advice and guidance and supports to those contracts. We're not the end decision makers. I don't know, Chris, if you want to.
Okay. No, that's fine. That's good. I do want to talk about a specific program. I want to talk about Axiom Assist. Are you familiar with Axiom Assist?
Certainly Sandra would be.
What's, Ms. Cascadin, what program did Assist replace?
Ms. Cascadin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Axios Assist application, which is our service desk or our help desk application, actually replaced multiple different applications in government. When we first came together as a shared services, all of the different government departments were kind of using their own help desk software to take calls from their own department to troubleshoot any issues that they were having as it pertained to technology or applications. The Axios Assist program, it actually replaced in the launch around 6 different applications. Some of those applications were actually used within IT itself. So we had 2 or 3 service desks in the IT. And what was happening is when our clients made a call, they called into the first service desk, and then that first service desk had to hand a ticket over to our infrastructure folks, who then had to recreate the ticket and then respond to the ticket. That information would never get back to the first service desk, so we had a broken process in IT. So it replaced a number of those different systems. So now we have one system across government, and that's used by the health authority, so there's no handoffs and kind of valleys where tickets could get lost.
Okay, so it replaced about 6 systems in your estimation. You mentioned the health authority in your comments, so this is used through the health authority and all the departments? This is the system now, Axiom Assist?
So yes, it is used, it's actually used in multiple departments. So when we determined that having one service desk tool was most efficient and effective, what we then did is we established this tool as a corporate tool all across government. So we have, for example, Transportation Infrastructure Renewal have opted to use this service desk tool for some of their services that they're delivering to citizens, and so citizens can call in log a ticket about something that's happening in the province, and then TIR can distribute that ticket to the appropriate department. So not only did we standardize from an IT perspective, what we chose a tool that could be used by other departments if they had the same need for taking a request or a trouble and then resolving that trouble and keeping track of it through the whole process.
And it's a service desk tool. Presumably there's a gazillion service desk tools on the market. How did you decide on this one?
Ms. Cascade?
So what we did is when we were coming together as shared services, the health authority actually were leading the government in the decision of standardizing on a service desk tool. So the health authorities had gone out to a procurement process, and they went through a very stringent process in which they selected Axios Assist for their tool. They were partway through the implementation when we declared shared services and then started to take the health authorities' IT supports in. What we then did is the government did a deep dive on the functionality of Assist to see if it would fit the government requirements. We assessed that it did fit the government requirements, and we adopted the tool that health actually went to an RFP on for all of government, because they already had purchased licenses, and we could easily move the licenses up to an enterprise license to accommodate all of the provincial needs.
Okay. Is Axios Assist fully operational across all departments?
So yes, Axios Assist is fully functional across the Health Authority and the IWK, as well as all government departments. The product itself delivers, I would say, multiple services through a whole continuum. So it can take a ticket, resolve a ticket, track that resolution of a ticket. You can do analytics around how many tickets you're getting for any specific cause. We also have enabled self-service, which is something that was a function that enables people to go in and basically put their own tickets in, so you don't have to call the service desk, wait on the phone, and wait for a service technician to respond to your call. There's other pieces of functionality that we continue to roll out. So, for example, we can roll out asset tracking as part of Axios Assist as well, change management. Those other higher level functions are contemplated for the rollout, and we're working our way through them.
Okay. I'm looking at a chart that was provided. I guess it's a procurement chart. I could maybe get a copy of this and table, but it was in your thing and it was in your package. So on March 2nd, there was an award to Sierra Systems for implementation of Axios Assist. It's a $1 million contract. What was provided on March? What is that? What was that tender for? It was $1,100,000.
So the implementation of Axios Assist was actually a 3-year initiative, which may sound like a long period of time, but in order to implement these systems, what you really need to do is you need to redesign your entire business process. So not only do you have to redesign your business process.
So if I may, so that was the full implementation?
Yes.
That was $1.1 million to implement Axios Assist across other government departments, or to continue the health authority partial implementation that was going?
So the contract for Sierra was the only company that Axios Assist appointed and authorized to implement their product. So we had no option to go to Sierra, because it's the only company that Axios Assist has chosen to be their implementation partner. So you buy the product from Axios and you buy the implementation from Sierra. The implementation for Sierra was for full government. And
okay.
we've also...
Including the health authority?
We also have included the health authority in that as well.
There was a partial implementation going at that time that this tender was awarded. Okay. And then you mentioned in your comments that the health authority was already down the road with Axios Assist, and they had licenses and everything. Was kind of
But there was another tender awarded on March 5th under alternative procurement, and this was for Axios Assist license, $645,000. So they had licenses, but they didn't have enough. You had to buy a bunch more, correct?
Yes, what we did is the health authorities had enough licenses to cover themselves. Generally in government, what we do is we negotiate with contractors for something called enterprise licenses, which means that we can actually roll out those services to a defined set of clients with no additional cost. So we did have to increase the number of licenses to include the province.
And can you tell me about a company called Livis Consulting, which seems to be, I don't know, are they part of this Axios Assist? I see some tenders for Livis Consulting, like $300,000, $500,000. Are they part of Axios Assist's implementation?
So I don't recall the name of that company. I can certainly follow up, but it doesn't ring a bell with regard to Axios Assist, but I will certainly follow up.
Okay. So in terms of the implementation, which you've mentioned is fully completed, I guess, at this time, fully operational, but the tenders to Sierra Systems, who was already, the health authority was already going with Axios Assist, so therefore had to go with Sierra Systems. And then the government came along and said, that's a good idea, we'll do that too. But the tenders to Sierra Systems were initially awarded like $3.8 million, the combination of the tenders, but it actually ended up costing, just from what I could see of a quick scan, over $7 million. This is a pretty expensive undertaking, this implementation. Is that a fair summary?
So the service desk tools and everything that attaches to service desk tools is managing a fairly significant piece of our business. It's managing every contact with every client, whether it's a healthcare client or it's a government client, and tracking those contacts, as well as managing assets, change management processes, and things like that. So the implementation for these types of systems, and really there's probably only about 2 that are of the category that we require in order to manage the services that we're managing. So I believe that the project was on budget. We did not go over budget for this project for what we were requesting.
Well, the tender was for $3.8 million, but the government's paid $7.3. Can you explain how that's on budget?
So there are, through the alternate procurement process and through projects, we pay vendors based on milestones. So if you see one payment to a vendor, it may mean it's a payment for 1 year's worth of work. So you have to add up, when you add up all of those payments are actually what it cost to do the implementation. So just looking at one vendor's one line is not what the whole project was about.
But with all due respect, I'm looking at actual tenders that were issued. And the first one that I'm looking at is the non-competitive tender, statutory monopoly, Sierra Systems, and the text is implementation, Axios Assist, $1,100,000. So perhaps what I'm hearing, and I just maybe some clarification, was this tendered in multiple pieces, or was it the tender actually for the full implementation?
So you don't tender in multiple pieces. You pay.
That's what I'm asking.
You pay in multiple pieces.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't care how it's paid, but I'm looking at tenders that were awarded for $3.8 million and payments that were $7.3. Yeah. That's what I'm struggling with. It seems to me that it was over budget, but you made the statement that it certainly wasn't.
No, and all of the documentation we have from our project team is this project was not over budget. It delivered what it was supposed to deliver. The various alternate procurements here have to be all added up, and that the addition of all of those alternate procurements is the total cost of what that project cost. So each of these alternate procurements, so if you see a big line item, it is not the total cost of the project. It is associated with our payment schedule for those vendors.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because are you saying that the tendering process was more closely aligned with when payments would be made as to what the actual cost was?
Mr. Conrad would like to make a comment.
So I'm not sure I understand when I believe you said earlier you have a document in front of you that says the tender was originally for $3 million, Mr. Houston, or something. I'm not sure what document you're referring to. It might be helpful if we were a little more, if we understood a little better kind of what the source document you're asking about is.
We can maybe get a copy, but it's in your package that you sent here, but we'll get you a copy, but it's a tender number. I don't know if you have tender numbers there. 601489190. And the awarded amount is $3.8 million to Sierra Systems. Sorry, my apologies. I should have had that there, but I guess we'll get a copy of that. But I guess what I'm curious about is the department or the health authority was in the midst of implementing a ticketing system, probably suited their needs. The needs of the health authority ticketing system are probably different than the Department of the Environment's ticketing system or the department. If I'm blunt, it feels like we, as a province, purchased a Cadillac Escalade Stretch when maybe an Escort would have did it for most departments, and I feel like the cost is of the Cadillac Escalade Stretch double, and that's what I'm concerned about, because when I see a tender issued for $3.8 million, the cost is now up over $7 million. And I know we heard today that it's fully operational, but that's not what I'm hearing from people on the ground. So I'm just trying to get my head around why are we doing this, and at what point do we say, like, what are your indicators that you can look at? What are your metrics that you can look at and say this system is doing what we need?
Thank you. It's helpful.
Ms. Cascade?
Certainly. So from the choice of Axios Assist and the comment with regard to a system that may fit the health authority, may not fit the government. In fact, when you're in IT, there are a number of things, regardless of the industry that you're in, it's the same process and the same tools are required. A service desk tool is one of those tools. So Axios Assist, from an application perspective, is actually in many organizations all over the world doing the same type of IT function. That is, when a user calls in, the service desk person can actually log the ticket, track the information, access a knowledge base which will help them troubleshoot what the problem that the person is having on the other end of the phone and help them solve their problem. Or if they can't solve the problem on the phone, create a ticket and move it deeper into the IT group. So the functionality that the health authority required is exactly the same functionality that the government required. We went through months of functional analysis with Axios Assist, with the health people at the table, and we laid out all the functional requirements for government, and we basically have checklists of each one of those functional requirements that Axios Assist actually had the requirements that we needed as government, and it was the tool that would work for government. And we actually needed a tool to replace the multiple tools that we had. Now, change is difficult. Change is exceptionally...
If I may, before we get into a discussion about change,
yeah.
If the department has a list of the functions that were required, do you have an update as to somebody has said this one's operational, this one's operational? Is that something you can provide to us?
Yes, we can. I can actually provide a detailed synopsis of the entire project, including that.
Okay, but not the cost? Can you tell me?
Including the cost. Well, I'll provide the cost.
Okay, can you tell me the cost? How much have we spent on Axios Assist as of today?
So what I will do is I will bring in a report that will have the actual costs itemized all the way through the project, where we are today, the functionality that we've actually implemented for what clients, and I'll provide that level of documentation on that project.
Okay, but is that available today? Could we get that before the meeting's over, maybe? Is it something that could be printed and sent in?
Yeah, probably not the level of detail that what you're looking for. I'll have to have people put it together from multiple documents.
Okay, what about the cost? Is the cost to date something we could get somebody back at the shop to print off and send in?
I'll see if we can get that before the end of the meeting.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. And is there more implementation on Axios Assist that the province is still looking to implement? In other words, how many more months or years will see our systems be engaged by the province implementing functionality of Axios Assist?
Ms. Cascaden, you have 30 seconds.
So it will depend on the projects and the requests based on the departments. So if a department comes to us and says we would like to implement Axios Assist, we may have to re-engage with Sierra in a separate project in order to implement a version of Axios.
But it'll have to be Sierra, right?
It has to be Sierra.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We will move now to the NDP Caucus. Ms. Roberts, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to start, if I could, Mr. Conrad, probably, on page 14.3 in the budget for internal services, we can see that there's more than 100 positions currently not filled in the department. You're 100 under budget in terms of your FTEs. Can you explain why?
Mr. Conrad.
Sure. So one of the things I provided in the package to you in advance was a little bit of a timeline. So in terms of the formation of the department, it focuses primarily on the IT side of the organization, but it does give a bit of a sense of the some of the challenge that we've had or some of the development that we've had in terms of the work that's gone forward. So this kind of with an arrow on it picture that I provided. One of the things we say in the department is in many ways, although the department was created in 2014 and we're 3 years old, in some ways we've been 1 year old 3 times. So it's a bit flippant way to describe the work. But originally the department was created from, I believe it was 7 different divisions coming from 5 different departments, which brought together about 600 people inside of the department. And we were that way for a number of months, and then we brought in some folks for the procurement side from the health authority and some other departments. Then the following year, in April, we brought in IT services from across government. So originally we had what was then the relatively small 300-person CIO office. The following year there had been IT staff spread throughout all government departments. We brought those into our department. The next year we actually gave back a piece of what we had from our public works piece back to the Department of Transportation and brought in all of the IT people from the health authority. And in the midst of all that, we were also centralizing our freedom of information, protection of privacy, information access privacy folks. So I tell that story a bit because one of the things that's happened is that we have not had a very stable environment in terms of workforce size. Well, we went from 600 people to around 900 people, then we lost a couple hundred people that went back to the Department of Transportation. We brought in 300 people from the Department of, from the Health Authority and the IWK. And one of the things we've tried to be really careful about is the stability of staffing in the department. So we do have a number of vacancies, and we've had a fairly high level of vacancies in the department relative to other departments for the last several years. One of the things we wanted to do was, as we took in new pieces, often they would come to us with vacancies already in existence, right? So people, when we did the health authority work, for example, and took the stuff from the health authority, you can imagine, because we took a piece of non-clinical, and they kept the clinical, there were people that had dual roles prior to the transfer. So they would keep somebody that had been 50-50, and we would take somebody that had been 50-50, and we'd each end up with a partially vacant position or a fully vacant position. One of the things we wanted to do was to get stable before we made a lot of decisions about staffing. So we've been reasonably cautious in terms of filling all the vacancies we have. We believe we're going to need those vacancies, the positions that we have in the long term. So we have this year in the budget process given back a number of positions to the centre that we've come to understand that we don't need. We've repurposed quite a number of positions that previously were in one role, and we've moved them to a different role. So So part of it has been this instability of transferring people in and out, and us really wanting to be thoughtful about understanding what we've inherited. So we talk about transition, stabilize, and then transform. I know it's a bit of a long answer. The other piece I would say is it's a really rapidly changing environment, right? So part of what happened, so the example that we've just been talking about around help desk has been, as we came together, we knew that part of our plan was to centralize help desk services, which drives us to more efficiency. Part of our plan that Kevin's heavily involved in is to try and manage multiple systems that do similar kind of work. So we knew we would be driving out some efficiencies, so we wanted to be careful not to fully staff with permanent staff, people in areas in which maybe down the road we would be reducing staff complement there because of some of these efficiencies we've gained. So it sounds like a long-winded bureaucratic answer, and I apologize for that, but it really has been a process of us being careful about transition. We actually have been more aggressive in the last number of months as our system has stabilized. So we've now had about 18 months with the same organization. We've restructured in many of the divisions. We've moved around a number of those resources, and we've started to be a little more aggressive in terms of getting the right bodies in the right seats, we believe, over the last few months. So I think you'll see that number change a bit into the future.
Thank you for that answer. And has the department tracked cost savings as a result of the positions being vacant?
Absolutely. So there's a number of things that that happen with efficiencies in terms of savings. So we absolutely track, and I apologize, I don't have those numbers with me, but we absolutely track the savings as a result of position savings. One of the things that's also happened is, as we've gone in and advanced some of these initiatives and other things, those savings become an opportunity for us to offset costs for government. So often within the organization, we may be using those savings still within our budget for some other government-approved initiative as a way to manage through the transitions that we're going through. But we do track how many positions are vacant on any given day, how much money we've saved to date in that area, and what that money's been redirected towards within the department.
A quick question related to my colleague's line of questions around Axiom Assist. Does that software or that I don't even know if software is the right word for it, does it have any human resources functions, or is it strictly IT?
It's an IT system and a tracking system, so I guess I'm only cautious. It's not a tool we would use to track things like vacancies, if that's what you're asking.
And it's not involved in hiring?
And it's not involved in hiring. No.
Onboarding of staff?
No. Okay. I mean, there's human resource issues in terms of using it and all of that, but it's not a management of human resources system.
Okay. Alternative procurement practices are defined as specialized, exceptional practices that allow for deviation from the normal procurement processes, which can include non-competitive procurement in the place of competitive process or a limited competition in lieu of an open competition. What percentage of government procurement falls within the alternative procurement practice?
I feel the need to let Mr. Mitchell talk for a while.
Mr. Mitchell?
Thank you. So it varies year to year.
Just hold on one moment. Mr. Mitchell, there you go.
Sorry, waiting for the light again. It varies year to year. We generally sit approximately 80% of the dollar value of procurement for government would go through a competitive process, leaving somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20% in the alternate procurement process.
Okay. And has that changed over time?
It's remained relatively constant. So we do a report annually that takes a look at a roll-up of a number of different empirical numbers. It's remained that way certainly for the last 3 or 4 years. It's been fairly consistent at an 80-20 split.
Okay. Can you provide some examples, maybe other than the Axiom Assist story, which we kind of have a shape of now, of when this type of procurement would be appropriate and when it would not?
Certainly, when we redid the procurement policy, as the deputy mentioned in the opening comments for October 2016, we mirrored what was coming in the new CFTA. And so there's 28 different justifications for alternate procurements. They range from, from the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, the one that was coming. So we were working with the departments on a draft of that. So we had an idea what 28 justifications would be coming as a result of the change from the AIT or the Agreement on Internal Trade to the CFTA. And so we have 28 justifications now, which would range from emergency situations that you would expect if the time doesn't exist for the government to make a procurement, to areas such as copyright requirements to use the same person or the same company as provided the service initially, to we went to an open competitive competition. We had no bidders, which were successful, and therefore we have an alternate procurement situation where we can sole source after that fact. So there are a number of them, and they're all meant to be utilized with some real prudence. So the default is to a competitive process, and when there isn't, or when it makes more sense for the government for one of those 28 reasons, then the alternate procurement process is in existence for those particular reasons.
I'm just going to clarify. I have in front of me the sustainable procurement policy from the Common Services Manual. Is that the revised procurement policy that you're referring to from October 2016?
Yes, ma'am. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. I'm struck that the whole thing is called a sustainable procurement policy, but there's no actual definition in the policy of what the objectives, like what makes it a sustainable procurement policy. There's reference to a number of different acts that have objectives, including the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act and the Green Economy Act. But I was struck there are references in a number of spots to social goals. I think under the definition of sustainable procurement, which is under the definitions, it says a holistic approach to government procurement that considers the environmental, economic, and social factors related to the goods, services, and construction that are procured. But is the intent that all government procurement would be considering environmental, economic, and social objectives as well as best value for government, or is there a hierarchy of the different objectives that you're trying to hit with best value for government money being the first, or yeah?
Thank you. So the answer is, and I hate to say it depends, but the reality is that the sustainable part of that, so social enterprise, et cetera, is always one of the factors or one of the lenses we use on the determination of best value. So not best price and not, so there'll be a number of pieces that we would rank through what's important to a particular procurement. Some may have economic development as a larger percentage of a selection for the appropriate vendor. Some may put that down to a lower level where we would bring another lens on depending on which the procurement is that we were looking for. So I think in that the policy that you see, we worked quite diligently over a couple of years with Paul Emanuele, who is a renowned procurement law office in Toronto. And the idea was, the predecessor to this policy gave very little how-to, if you like, for folks who are looking to try and remain compliant with the policy. This one designed a policy. Attached to that is a manual, which is broken down into a number of protocols, which actually tells folks who are responsible for following the policy how to do particular things, one of which would be alternate procurement, another one would be procurement plans and how to create them, et cetera. So it's much more defined as to how to when people really want to follow the policy, and that's what we were finding they just weren't getting the right kind of guidance. This one designs a protocol which helps them to do that, and then further, we created templates for all of the different kinds of documents which you would go to market for. So a request for proposal, a request for quote, a request for information, those type of deals, so that we can make a consistent approach for government out to industry when we go there for the competitiveness. It's actually been duplicated, so now the policy says any of the MASH sector entities who don't necessarily have to follow it, what they do have to have is in place of it, they have to have their own policy, which also mirrors some of the things which are in the procurement policy for the provincial level.
Can you provide me an example or explain how alternative procurement practices have provided opportunities for social enterprises since the policy came into effect?
I don't have any specific examples on top of mind. I know we're actually doing a lot of work right now. So the manager who's on my staff, Linda Rankin, is actually creating some video assist videos, if you like, that will go to departments to have them better aware of what social enterprises are available for. And so it's meant to not change the procurement practice so much as inform people that there are other opportunities that they can take a look at in that social economic piece. It's an interesting balance. So government in mandate to my position says we have particular targets of benefits we want to realize. We want to realize from the whole shared services concept some aggregation of procurement, et cetera. So we look for best value, and some of that does equate to best price. So it's the balance between that and the ability of using the procurement tool for other things which are government priorities. So in some cases that would be a social economic benefit as well.
Mr. Conrad?
I guess just to your question, if I understood it properly, around examples of where we used alternate procurement for social enterprise, I guess one of the things I would point out is that would not necessarily be the only tool where we might try and use social good or social benefit. So there could be RFPs, there could be, so the example Chris gave, and I'm a little bit at risk here, but I think this is correct, where we're producing videos, we're actually using a social enterprise agency to produce the videos, which I believe we did as an under threshold procurement. So it wouldn't necessarily have been an alternate procurement, but it would have been something where we had an option to go out and do that in a procurement vehicle. So I just wanted to be clear that it's not, the policy doesn't say alternate procurement is the tool to get us to social enterprise. It's a broader kind of concept around how do we think about social inclusion in some of the work we do. So.
And maybe just so I understand clearer, be it alternate procurement or be it just like your typical procurement route, as you decide the objectives that you're trying to hit, how much you're going to value the price, how much you're going to value whatever environmental or social good, is that all done through a scoring system, and that's how you would end up with, deciding on the final, on the successful bidder in the end?
Mr. Mitchell?
That's correct. So we'll work with the department who's looking to make the acquisition or go to market. There's quite a lot of front-end work, so we put a governance structure together, a charter for what it is that they're looking to purchase, and then we'll go through with them what are the important aspects. We have the responsibility from procurement to put that lens back on the social side of that, to look for best value, et cetera. So it's very much a combined effort between the department looking to purchase and procurement on the government side to ensure that all of those things are included. But then to your point, exactly. So when we'll go out to market for that good or service, the evaluation criteria are determined in advance. And so if there were points in there for economic development or points in there for particular experience or who they bring to the table as far as a particular person, they would all be included in and aggregated up in an evaluation scoring guide, which would then, in the end of the day, mathematically determine who was actually awarded that work. Yeah.
And how often do bidders ask for a bidder debriefing?
In my experience, it depends. It's available to any of the proponents. So once the award of a contract is made, it's open and made recommendation to most of the unsuccessful bidders that if they want to take advantage of that opportunity, it's actually a good growth opportunity for the non-successful bidders because it speaks to them not relative to the other bids, but in their own where they were able to gain good marks or where they lost points in the evaluation process. And it's meant to be informative for the next time that they put a bid in with a government tender.
I should have been keeping better track of my time. Under a previous Liberal government, we saw 39 P3 schools built primarily by 3 developers, and Auditor General's report in 2010 highlighted a glaring lack of checks and balances in the contracts. And then in 2016, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives concluded that the P3's program in Nova Scotia was a failure. Though it did do lots of good for those companies' bottom lines. If the government were looking at the P3 model for future infrastructure projects, what role would internal services have in providing analysis to determine the possible risks associated with that model?
Mr. Conrad.
So P3 processes, again, complex question, obviously. P3 processes generally require some sort of procurement process to go through. So we would be working with the department or departments in some cases that are considering going to market on how to go to market to find the companies, what analysis they might use, setting up evaluation criteria, doing that kind of thing. It wouldn't be our department that would be providing should they or shouldn't they use P3. That would not be a role for us. That would be analysis that the department would take on in terms of designing the program. It would be more...
Sorry to interrupt. The time has expired. We'll move to the Liberal Caucus and Ms. Lonis-Croft.
Well, good morning, and thank you for your remarks. I have to say, Deputy, that you said it was an exciting time for this work. I find it a confusing time for myself. I guess I'm not as into this topic as you would, and I'm glad to see that for you, your work is stimulating. Mine is too. I was very stimulated reading these notes in preparation. I'm a little confused about I see you have done a new procurement policy, and you spoke about it earlier. So we have a regular procurement, and then we have the alternate, and then the non-competitive. Can you just sort of brief me on the differences there? And
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you. So perhaps in its basic, or most basic, the government in its desire to be open, fair, and transparent naturally moves to the competitive process. So what that would be is we would post an RFP or a request for proposal through our tenders website, making it available for anybody who wants to bid. We do that generally when we're aware of the fact that there will be multiple vendors who are interested in that work for the government. Where we begin to move, so that's your competitive. Where we begin to move to a non-competitive is when either our analysis indicates that there may only be one vendor who's able to provide the service that we're looking for, or goods or service, or one of those 28 justifications that are in the protocol of the policy, which indicates there are some places in there the government would be better served not to go through a competitive process. The internal to the competitive piece, we also break that down a little bit further. So we would, at the front end of a particular recurring procurement, so for example, low cost, high volume items such as stationery and the like, the government will set up standing offers, which allow for that speed of purchase to be put in place. We also have an ability to do invitational competition, so still competitive, but we can invite vendors, 2, 3, 4, 5 vendors into a competition and limit it a little bit while still creating the time savings that would be done in an alternate procurement or a sole source procurement. So it's really meant to start from the sort of pendulum all the way to the competitive side, go that way until there's evidence that it's either better for the government or there's no other option, and then we'll slip into the non-competitive side, which is governed by those alternate procurements that are provided in the package for the 28 justifications for that.
So what is the advantage of all that, of the alternative types of procurement?
So depending on which of the 28 that you select, the benefits would be if the government has a particular requirement for one of the examples, to it being in their best interest not to make it available to everybody something that they wanted. So if they wanted to hire, for example, an audit function to come in and look at a particular issue that they want, and it's not particularly beneficial or in anybody's interest to make that available to everybody, then that's an alternate procurement reason for not going out to a public tender. If we go to a public tender and nobody provides a submission or a bid which is evaluated as a successful bid, then the government now still needs the good or service that it went to market for. It can now select an individual firm, either one of the original bidders or not, and engage in a direct one-on-one or a sole source negotiation with that vendor. So it really depends. It's not meant to circumvent competitive process. It's meant to allow for the very small number of reasons why it's not in the government's best interest in order to go to an open, competitive, full process.
So this new policy was 2016?
Yes, ma'am, October.
So are you doing ongoing reviews and evaluations of how this process is going?
So yes, we do a number of different reviews. We create for government through the Finance Treasury Board a report on savings which have been created as a result of the stand-up of a strategic procurement, of number of, so I mentioned earlier that the numbers remain relatively consistent. This will be the first full year under the new policy. So we'll determine at that time whether the number of alternate versus competitive bids has remained again consistently at around 80-20. And we also have a number of checkbacks in areas such as a procurement advisory group for which I'm the chair of. We talk to a number of the MASH sector or the municipality, academic, school board and health sectors to see whether the policy is doing for them what they're looking for. So does it provide them the guidance? Does it allow them to better run their procurement events with their vendor communities, and are they seeing successful tenders at the end of the day, realizing best value for money?
And that's the work of the advisory group?
It's one of the good indicator back from them. So the work is actually inside of ours. We have a compliance program which looks and determines, are people following the policy? Are they posting their tenders on the website? Do they post the successful bids? Are they providing vendor debriefs? So it really is a compliance to the policy, which is how we're actually determining if it's in place, if it's being utilized, and it's being helpful to the folks who are doing those procurements.
So what's the follow-up for compliance?
The follow-up in terms of if they're not compliant?
Yes.
So we do an annual, right now we've done it with the municipalities, so we do an annual verification. It's a letter to them asking them to confirm a number of, or a sequence of questions. We have had to date very good compliance from the municipalities. The areas where they have not is usually seen on a per RFP basis, and we get that indication from vendor communities who are unpleased with the posting that's out there. We interact with the municipality or the school board, et cetera, and generally when we point out the things which are not in compliance to policy, they've modified their tender or their procedures in order to come in line with that.
Oh, you know, as an MLA, I often get inquiries into tenders, especially around services like snow removal and property maintenance, and often these are 3-year awarded contracts with a clause of quality control or whatever. I get complaints, you know, from constituents feeling that maybe some jobs are not done to their standards. Can you speak to that? How often is that reviewed? What would I do as an MLA to respond to such a call?
Sure. So there's two pieces. That one is when we let the contract, there will be specific terms and conditions in a contract. So for the examples you used of potentially grounds maintenance, et cetera, there'll be specific deliverables that the vendor needs to provide. Oftentimes, I suspect some of the complaint you may hear is the individual has a set of their own evaluative criteria, if you like, and so they want to see something done a particular way. That may not be in line with what's actually been contracted out to the vendor. If it is in line, and it's just a case of the vendor not actually delivering to the level that they're supposed to or have been contracted to, the individual, either through your office or directly with, in the case of ground maintenance, with the TIR, the Transportation Infrastructure Review Department, can lodge their concern, and then whoever's responsible for managing that specific contract would be in touch with the vendor and be able to modify the behavior. So either bring it up to the standard which was identified in the contract, or if it's not the first time that that's been identified, there is a possibility for punitive damages in there. And at the end of not being able to adjust that service, there is an opportunity to terminate contract for cause if things haven't gone the way that they were supposed to be or had been contracted for.
So termination has taken place in such circumstances?
Correct. It's very infrequent. So government is not in a position where it likes to terminate contracts for which A, they've put a lot of time into creating and allowing or letting the contract, and B, it oftentimes creates a gap in service. So if you terminate one particular vendor, you need to bring on another one, obviously, because the service requirement still exists. So it's not something that's done lightly, and it's not done very often. But I have seen it done both at the provincial level and at the municipal level as well.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to change sort of to the e-bidding. Has it gone online now, or is it it's fall of 2017? So has it started?
Thank you. So e-bidding is, as the deputy pointed out at the start about change management, e-bidding in Nova Scotia is a fairly significant change management issue. We're going, a number of years ago, we went away from open tenders. We've now only started, or we now only post our tenders on an electronic board. E-bidding is the sort of natural next step, which will be vendors will find their RFP of interest or their request for proposal of interest, create their submission in the tool and submit, and we'll do all the evaluation within the tool. So it's had one delay, so we were looking at sort of early fall. We were hopeful to be launched about the 1st of October. It's going to likely slide towards the end of October, early part of November, and then we're fully on track. So it's just a matter of some of the internal pieces of the tool we had to fine tune, but yep, we're on track for a launch early first week, second week of November.
What benefit, other than saving paper? I know a lot of people are going paperless, but what are the advantages to e-bidding?
So there's advantages to the vendor community. So if you look in the wintertime, a number of people who get stuck driving to Halifax to drop off tenders, stuck on the bridge, had a tire blowout. I know it sounds odd, but we have many of those where people are late for the 2 o'clock tender drop. So in this case, they'll put their submission in electronically. And what we've heard, we did 8 visits around the province in the last month to explain to the vendor community what's coming. They're very excited for it. There are, it's the same as anything. There's a majority and a minority. So the majority of folks are already doing some form of e-bidding with other jurisdictions than the province, and so are glad to see us step into the future. There are those who have concerns about it, whether that's a technological concern or whether it's, I don't do a lot of business with government, so can somebody help me? And we're doing our best to make sure we're out and explaining to folks how it's going to work. We have I call it a traveling roadshow, but we have a vendor interaction capability that we can take to any of the communities and actually explain through how the process is going to work. That's the benefits to the vendor community, so they get to build inside of a tool and submit electronically. The benefit to the government is departments will now be able to create much more streamlined documents, evaluate within the tool, which allows, if well, so for the folks who haven't had the privilege of evaluating large, complex RFPs, they can be very, very time-consuming. The tool allows for that evaluation. The SAP Ariba tool that we've implemented allows for that evaluation. And so it's a time saver, a consistency of approach from government, and an ability to step into the electronic age where people are unable to now submit responses which are thrown out right at the beginning of evaluation because they forgot something. This tool won't allow you to submit until you've got all the right paperwork. So it's a benefit to both sides in that case. We don't lose really good bids and they don't get thrown out of a process for want of just one particular piece of documentation missing.
So you mentioned about you had meetings around the province. So where were those?
So I know we had it in Dartmouth and Halifax were 2 of the 8, and I apologize, I don't have the exact locations, but I know we were in Lunenburg, I know we were in Truro, we were in several other external places rather. Sydney, I'm hearing Sydney. I would have to get you the list of the actual ones.
Okay.
But
will there be more as you go online?
Right. So there's none planned, but what we left with the folks we were out there with was we're happy to bring that exact piece or an updated piece back to the communities and listen to the concerns or questions and walk through how to make it successful as well.
So how did you contact, I didn't know that you had one in Lunenburg, so I'm just sort of curious. So did you just go to regular vendors that you would use and let them know you were coming, or was it
No, I think we went through, and the acronym escapes me, but the economic
development, okay.
Sorry, yes. And so we went to them and said, we'd like to do one here. We worked through them to actually get the individual firms or people that would want to come to it.
Right.
And then we set up timings with them and went out to visit with them.
Okay. So some folks just aren't technically blessed, I guess. So is there a tutoring component to that, or a way that people who would like to go online for the convenience but may need a little bit of training other than these meetings that you've had? Is there a tutorial or anything like that that goes with the program?
Yeah, so right now we're building an electronic tutorial which will sit on our website, which is just a walkthrough from start to finish of how to do it. There's also, we've set up our own helpline, so if the decision or the difficulty you have is procurement related, you'll call our helpline. If it's tool related, so the SAP Ariba, there's a 1-800 helpline that will help people actually work their way through the usage of the tool as well. So we've looked at both sides of that, procurement challenges as well as the tool or the IT challenge, and they're both available. And like I said, we've now just built an e-training or an e-information tool which hangs in our website, which people can go and take a look at as well.
Okay, thank you. How much time?
You have 4 minutes remaining. 4
minutes. I think my colleague from Chester St. Margaret's had a question about the e-bidding as well, so I'll let close out.
Mr. McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll direct the question perhaps to whoever feels best equipped. Going back to the alternate procurement process, I'm curious as to how that leaves a proponent in their ability to negotiate on the contract. Is there some mechanism to make arrangements? Once a proponent is selected, is there an ability then just to continue electronically in negotiations, or does it automatically go face-to-face or in writing? How might that be handled? Over to you, Chris.
Mr. Conrad.
Sorry, just to be clear on the question. So once a contract is negotiated through an alternate or arranged through an alternate procurement, how do we handle the negotiation of that contract?
Correct.
Okay.
So there's a number of ways. So obviously transfer of documents and exchange of information through electronic means is common, right? So we're all working in an electronic age with email and a number of other tools. But the heart of the negotiation process, I think, is still an in-person meeting, and it depends on the complexity of the contract. So again, if it's a very small, we're going out for to buy a good, right? We just want to, I shouldn't say just, but we want to buy water glasses, and it's extremely clear on what we want. We may be going straight price. So as long as you meet the qualification and it's a straight price bid, there may not be a lot of negotiation. You get into a large contract like a multi-million-dollar telephone mobility contract, you could be into months of in-person negotiations on service level agreements and cost recovery and how invoices work and a whole range of other things. So it would be a pretty wide range in terms of options on how we would do that depending on the nature of the contract we were out for. Is that that answer the question?
Yeah, that addresses it fully, I think, or at least to my satisfaction. Now, do you have any comments towards how the new policy, this amended procurement policy, how does it differ from what we've previously done?
Mr. Mitchell.
So basically, the old policy was designed to follow the Agreement on Internal Trade. So it was specifically much more what you would expect from a policy document. It was very high language. What does the government want to do? Here's some following pieces. What we learned from working with Paul Emanuel's shop was, and what we got feedback from the rest of the procurement folks was they wanted more how-to. And so what we've done is we updated and modernized it to be in line with the Canadian Free Trade, as well as at the same time creating a manual behind it, which we call, not surprisingly, the policy manual, but it's composed of a number of protocols, which actually provide step-by-step how-to directions for folks to use them so that there's much more clarity on what's required in the procurement process.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize if that was repetitive to some of your previous remarks.
Mr. McKay,
how are we doing on time, Mr.
I do
Chair?
apologize. There's just seconds left.
Okay.
So
well, we'll
save it for the next round.
As the Speaker might say.
Okay. We'll now move back to the PC caucus for 14 minutes. Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of Axios Assist, I guess now we've circulated two documents, which one is the actual tender. So I'm looking at tender 601-48190, and that's a tender awarded to Sierra Systems for $3,840,650. And this other document is a summary of contracts and financials. I guess we got this through FOIPOP. I thought it came through the package, but it was a FOIPOP. And you'll notice about maybe halfway down that page, that particular tender is there, and it says that the paid amount, I guess at the time of this, was $7,310,000. So I'm just trying to get my head around $3.8 million tender with a paid of 7.3. Maybe you can shed some light on am I reading that correctly? Have we paid much more than the tender was awarded for?
Ms. Cascade?
So what we did is back in 2015, we awarded the tender to the $3.8 million as per indicated. And we ran that contract up until August 2016. At that point, what we did is we then extended the contract to March 2018. In the original tender, we indicated that we had the opportunity to do that if we required additional time and additional effort as we determined we wanted to roll out more modules. So we're rolling out more modules of the application. So we're doing the software and asset management module, and that's why we're requesting more services from Sierra.
So does that mean that the scope of the tender changed and you added more modules to
So we've opted to roll out additional modules, all within the product suite that we own.
Okay, but I'm just trying to, so the initial tender wasn't the full scope, because in time you changed the scope.
Yeah, so the initial tender was for certain modules in the application, and we opted to just tender at the time as much as we wanted to procure at the time. And then now that we are moving through the application and wishing to extend the modules that we own, we added to this. But when this went out, remember that Sierra is a sole source. They're the only ones who can do this work. So we had to extend the dollar value associated with the Sierra work to get the other modules and the other functionality in.
Okay. How many more times will it be extended in your estimation?
So again, if Sierra is the only company who can do this work with us, and another department comes to us and says, we would like to use this ticketing tool, this service desk tool, to do something in our department, we would then engage Sierra, which would increase the contract in order to put that new functionality in, because they're the only ones that we can work with to do that. So you could see this increasing just as we get new projects and new requests from other departments.
So would this have been a like if I think of a big project like SAP, there's thousands of SAP consultants. It provides some pricing flexibility. You get a competitive process. There's a number of ticketing systems. Yet we find ourselves with one specific ticketing system that has one consultant who's been paid 7.3 on an initial 3.8 tender. If I look down the page, another 1.1. I look down a little further, another 645,000. Pretty big numbers. How high could this go?
So again, a couple of points. One is the vendors themselves, Axios Assist, make the determination of who they authorize to implement their software. And so if they only authorize one company, you go with that one company. Some vendors have options and they authorize multiple companies. So
would you say that's a risk in picking that product?
It was a risk. It was identified as a risk. We assessed the risk and we assessed that it was an acceptable risk to us at that time.
But was it an acceptable risk in the context of we're putting a $3.8 million tender out and now it's just like, I just don't like, it can keep going on and the risk increases now every time you're, I guess, in for a penny, in for a pound at this stage. Is that kind of where we find ourselves? So the health authority was through an implementation and the government came along and said, okay, well, they've already put some money into this, let's carry on. What's the lifespan of this product?
So with any products of this magnitude, the lifespan is fairly significant. It could be 15 to 20 years once you've implemented a product like this, because you're not pulling it out. There are a lot of business process redesign that happen as you go into this product. It doesn't mean that we couldn't. And in this particular area, we do our research. We go to Gardner, who is a research company. We see who the top companies are that play in this quadrant. There is really only 2 companies that play in this quadrant to the level of the service and the functionality that we have assessed that we require.
Which, in terms of well, let me finish off on the lifespan. Axios Assist is built on Adobe Flash. And Adobe just announced they're going to stop improving or distributing Flash in 2020. Does it matter?
So the company has to work within their own product to evolve their product, and we rely on the companies because companies build their products on various versions of whatever common pieces of software are out there. It could be anything from a database version in Oracle. So it's not uncommon for companies to build on whatever the current products are, and when those products from those companies change, those other vendors have to change their product line. So they would have a product path that they would have to.
Okay, so it doesn't matter to you. It matters to Axiom, but not to the province.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. In terms of, I'm still receive the information how much we've spent on that product to date. Perhaps you have it already. Maybe do you have that information available on the total cost that's been spent on Axiom to date?
So what I have from our project managers is the original budget was around $11 million, between $11 and $13 million. From our project manager, she's saying that we are on budget. What we have done is we've allocated the budget to stay on budget.
Allocated the budget to stay on budget. Yeah. What does that mean?
So that means we could have, when we initially did the original budget, we may have thought we were going to put more money in one area, and we decided, no, we want to move the money to some other area in order to make sure that we do stay on budget to deliver the products and services that we basically said that we would.
Would it have been reasonable to tender, if you have an $11 million project with a sole source, would it have been reasonable just to tender the $11 million so people could see what we're dealing with here? Why would we tender 3.8 and then extend it up to 7.3 and then probably extend it to 9 and then probably, wouldn't it have been fair if there was a project plan that says this is an $11 million project and this is for license and this is for consulting, that we tender that consulting piece?
So at the very beginning, when we were bringing the health authority on board, and they had already kind of gone in this direction, and they were actually partway through their implementation, we did an assessment on whether if we tendered, would we get very many companies responding back to this. And as I had mentioned, there really aren't a lot of companies that play at this level. So you have to consider what's the cost of tendering, what's the possible outcome. You do assess the company, how they perform, how they deliver their services. You assess the functionality, all of those things. And through that detailed assessment, we determined that the health authority did their due diligence. The functionality that we were looking for was appropriate. The cost that we had assessed that this project would cost us and what Axios Assist said it would cost us were all within acceptable ranges. And so we opted not to go out to a full tender on this.
Mr. Conrad has a comment. Mr. Houston, if you wish.
Sure.
Mr. Conrad.
And I realize, Mr. Houston, you're focused on Axiom, so I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I guess I just did want to say that, often in our tendering processes, it's not unusual for us to build in the opportunity to add in other components. So not just in the IT world, but, we're looking for consistency of service and approach across government. So we often do tenders at one number, but make clear in the tender process that we may add in municipalities or universities or crowns or something else down the road that changes the size of the overall tender.
Sure. Thank you for that. But it even magnifies my concern that you had an $11 million project and you tendered 3.8, knowing it was going to be 11. And in fact, the ministerial approval was for 13. That's a big gap from 3.8 to 11 to say we can maybe add a few things in. I don't really understand why only 3.8 was tendered. It doesn't really seem that was the reality of what was being asked of the service provider. The reality seems like it was an $11 million project. Why did we accept a tender for $3.8 million? That's the part that I don't understand. If there's not an answer today, I'll accept that there's not an answer. Again, but if there's an answer, I'd love to hear the explanation.
Again, I think we go to market for the pieces that we know of at the time we go for market and allow for opportunity to bring other things in as things change, as we grow, as we do other things. So, I don't know that at the time, again, we can get more information for you as we committed we would, but I don't know at the time we went to market that we were fully approved for a project of this size. We were going to market for a piece we knew for sure we were doing, and I don't have the details in front of me, but I suspect said to the market when we went, there's opportunity that other things may be brought in. So we can find that detail for you, sir.
Fair enough. In my last couple minutes, I want to talk quickly about FlexTrack is a matching service, I guess. Government wants a product and consultants are on there, and it kind of is a marketplace that matches them up. So the province pays FlexTrack a fee of 2.1% for contracts that are satisfied through this marketplace. Correct?
Mr. Mitchell?
So I'd have to verify. I thought it was 1.5, but we can validate the percentage on what it is. And it's essentially the overhead for FlexTrack on the government's behalf to manage what has been historically run as a standing offer process. And this allows, as you mentioned, sort of a matching of government requirement, quick turnaround, good control over, and then what we're able to do is in a number of different areas.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does the contractor on the other side, do they also pay a fee to FlexTrack, do you know?
So the actual payment for FlexTrack doesn't come from government. The percentage that we're going to confirm is actually off of the payment. So if government had a $10,000 bill from a vendor, the vendor is paid $10,000 less that fee. So the government doesn't pay an additional fee on it.
Okay, and you don't know, the vendor may pay them something on top of that, or they may not.
No, they don't. No, so the vendor logs in with FlexTrack to be one of the vendors who can be identified.
Okay, that's fine. And the 2017 public accounts for internal services showed $4.8 million going to FlexTrack. So that's the full values of the contract. Some of that would be fees and some of that would be the full values. What would that 4.8 million be? That wouldn't be just fees, would it?
No, so what happens is, we kind of touched on it earlier about what's local and what's not. So all of those things which we actually pay for or government engages vendors for, there's a check cut to FlexTrack. FlexTrack cuts that percentage out, and then that's a flow through out to the vendors for the services which we would have otherwise paid for from a government perspective.
Okay, so the 4.8 is for services?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of the presentation of that in the financial statements, when I see a line item 4.8 million to FlexTrack, it's actually, that could be 100 people that money's going to, right?
That's correct. So they'll take their percentage off of that, and then that's transitioned through them to the payment to the vendor who's actually providing that service.
Right, so
Order. Time has expired. Okay. Move to the NDP Caucus and Mr. Wilson, Mr. David Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. I want to turn to the One Person, One Record project. And I know just about a year ago, I think it was in December, early December 2016, the government announced that they'll be moving to the next phase of the One Person, One Record project. I know it's a partnership between, I believe, Internal Services, NSHA, and would it be Department of Health, I guess. Just wondering, are you the lead on that project and in that moving forward, or is it one of the other two partners that are in that project?
Mr. Conrad.
So no, I wouldn't say we're the lead on that project. We obviously have an important role both from an IT perspective and from a procurement perspective as a partner on that, but the Department of Health and Wellness would be the primary lead. So we, again, I guess it depends on what you define as lead, but you know, they would have the lead in terms of what's the service they're looking for, what's the acceptable solution in terms of patient care. We would be a co-lead, particularly on the IT side, because we split this responsibility for clinical and non-clinical. So on the IT side, we would co-lead with health, and then from the procurement side, we'd be providing advice and guidance on process.
In the announcement in December, the government had indicated that there was going to be a request for supplier qualification, or an RFSQ, in early 2017. Are you aware of that? Did that happen in early 2017?
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, the RFSQ did go out. There was a number of submissions as a result of that, and there was a selection or a down select from the submissions to the vendors who have been identified as going forward. Yes.
And then also in that same announcement, it indicated once that happens that the government will review the results and then make a decision on next step. Have they made any decision? I'm trying to recall. I try to keep up to date on the announcements, especially around this topic. Has government made a decision on the next step after that RFSQ was issued?
Probably best from a Department of Health perspective, but the answer is we are still in the process of determining from the RFSQ the next steps and the chronology of what those will be, but they would certainly be in a better place to say how they're going to proceed with that.
So I know we are mid-October, and I think initially when it was announced and I'm trying to find where I seen that, but they indicated it could be roughly a 2-year project to get this up and running. Would you say that government's on track with that, or has there? I know that there was a general election between that announcement and now, but I would assume the work continued on within the departments. So, will government achieve that timeline of about 2 years to have implementation of the one person, one record? Mr. Conrad.
So you're right, Mr. Wilson. Certainly during the general election, there was work continued on through staff and activity continued on in the background. So, you know, the procurement process at its heart attempts to be apolitical in terms of the way we run the process. So, you know, the requirement to have a minister making decisions on a daily basis on a decision like that is not necessary. So, you know, we're at this point on track in terms of the processes that we've jointly agreed to. Obviously, a large, complex issue and ongoing complexity in terms of the providers in the field and mergers and acquisitions and a number of other things that are underway there. So, you know, we remain committed to the timelines and remain committed to the process, but it is a complex project with multiple partners that's going to have to go forward.
So where ultimately are you able to, and then maybe a little bit more on that, give us an idea of the cost so far? Where does the budget lie? Is it divided up between the three organizations? I mean, that's part of the frustrating part, trying to get some of the total amounts of what this project like this will cost, where it does have implications on a number of departments, and especially with the IWK and the NSAJ and the health and internal services. Are you able to give us any kind of ballpark? If you don't have it with you right now, I'll be more than welcome to take the information later with you on what the cost so far. And do you feel you're on track where you maybe anticipate where the budget will land once implementation happens?
So no, I'm afraid I wouldn't have that information with us. It will be, as you rightly have anticipated, you know, kind of a diversified budget, right? So again, I'm a bit bureaucratic, I know, but I'm always hesitant to answer the question because part of it is what's the project budget to get us up and running and the cost of sort of getting to solution versus the cost of full implementation and having all the practitioners involved, and where's the cost of that and sort of that total cost of change to the entire system. So, you know, I think believe we're on track and on budget as far as to this step. But when you're in the early stages of a big complex piece like this, and you're doing something like a request for supplier qualification and early stages of RFP development and those other things, you know, until we have a provider and know the solution, it's really, again, I'm sure it feels evasive from your side, but it's very difficult to nail down final costs when you're still in the market trying to resolve. But we can certainly work with our colleagues at Health and try to get some further joined up information back to the table.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I think just maybe a quick comment on that, just to hopefully make you understand how important I think the work you're doing here is on another area of concern of many Nova Scotians, and that's access to physicians. Recruitment, retention of physicians is an issue that should be a priority for government. So having the opportunity to sell a project like one person, one record, one person. I think that's what it does. Say that right? One person, one record. To attract physicians is extremely important, and if there is any delay, then that I think impedes the province's ability to get physicians here. Another quick question, and I'll hand it off to my colleague. I know there was mention of internal trade and Canadian free trade. What implications of the negotiations of NAFTA are on your desk right now? And listen, trying to pay attention to it. I don't know where we're going to land on this with the indication of President Trump and his that just, I think that adds to.
I hope that wasn't
my
commentary.
confusion of. Anyway, do you have maybe a quick comment on there are implications for the province of Nova Scotia if that deal is not renegotiated or significant changes to it. So, any comment on that? And are you playing a role in advising our federal government on making sure that the best interests of Nova Scotians are at the table also?
So, obviously a question best answered by our colleagues at Intergovernmental Affairs who have a team on this. I can tell you that I know for sure that they're participating in conversations with the federal government. So the federal government is the lead. We have a team at Intergovernmental Affairs that's traveling to the various negotiation sessions. So they've been in Washington, Ottawa, and Mexico City at the various sessions. They provide advice and guidance on the Nova Scotia impacts into the federal negotiators that are in the room. So I know from that perspective they're very close. For us, probably the piece that we're most directly involved in is there's a question in NAFTA around data sovereignty. So should we or could we maintain the need to have data housed in Canada versus being housed in other jurisdictions and the free travel of data across borders. So it's very unclear at this point, I believe, where that's going to end up, but that's probably the area that our department is most closely monitoring and paying attention to.
And I think I've brought up the Patriot Act before in other discussions, but anyways, maybe we'll leave that for another topic day, so I'll pass my time on to my colleague.
Ms. Roberts.
Thank you. I did want to go back to the conversation we were having before I ran out of time related to P3. So can you clarify, does the department have a method for comparing the long-term value of investing in publicly owned infrastructure versus paying public money for assets that are held by private companies?
Mr. Conrad.
So that wouldn't be, so back, I guess, to the conversation we just started, that wouldn't be the role for our department. So that would be an analytical role that would be undertaken by the department going, so generally, again, it obviously varies a little bit in the system, but, generally it's transportation infrastructure renewal who's taking the lead on those large public infrastructure projects in collaboration with partners like, health if it's a hospital, education if it's a school, and they are doing analytical work on the value, the structures, the process, that broad set of implications. So I do know, for example, that on the hospital side, they've been in the market recently and hired a consulting company to help transportation and help work through what are all those factors, how should they be considered, what are the pros and cons. I'm not completely in that loop on all of the factors that they're considering, but we would be involved and engaged in conversations, and then once they've made the decision, we'd get more involved in terms of whether they're going for a publicly owned infrastructure and what that set of proposals would look like and how you'd go to market for that versus would you go to market for P3. And obviously P3 is a generic term, so you can go to market for under a P3 model for various pieces of the infrastructure, the design piece, the design build piece, the design build operate piece. So even within P3 there's a fairly complex kind of evaluation of which pieces are you going to get done. So that really wouldn't be in our department that we would have those evaluations and checklists on what makes sense for government and what doesn't, probably most appropriately addressed to transportation infrastructure renewal.
In my last few minutes, I'm just going to switch gears entirely to freedom of information, which is under your department as well. And over the last year, there's been some significant changes in the process for freedom of information requests from a client perspective. I'm wondering if you could speak to any changes to the request fulfillment process, and specifically, is the department able to access and provide information transmitted by BlackBerry pins?
So thank you for the question. So we have had a number of changes, as you note. So it's been, we believe, a very positive piece. So we've done kind of two primary sets of changes. One is we've amalgamated the Freedom of Information staff from across government offices into a single unit, which has really increased our capacity and our ability to manage and have professional services. We've also recently implemented a case management client tracking system that has a public component available. So we're the first jurisdiction in Canada that you can do end-to-end online freedom of information requests and responses electronically inside of government. So those two things have really significantly advanced us in terms of our ability to process and manage the requests. Inside of government records are defined as what's available for access. So we don't have a specific process on texts or pins or those kinds of messages. It's a process that says that it's a requirement that people that are making government decisions and doing government business create records which are accessible for freedom of information requests. So it's more in the area of saying, doing work to ensure that people know that when they're making decisions, they need to create records that then become available rather than having a specific policy related to texts, for example.
And so what measures is the department using in order to make sure that FOI requests can fully access the way that decisions are made? How do you make sure that you can access those records?
In 10 seconds, please.
A lot of training being done right now across government, senior officials, cabinet members, deputies, to ensure that people know their obligation to provide those records.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you for the quick answer. We'll move now to the Liberal Caucus and Mr. Jessom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you folks for your time this morning. A few quick questions. Am I correct in understanding that FlexTrack is the kind of the new standing offer process, or is there, are they different?
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you. So it is a replacement for a number of standing offers which are in place. It is not a replacement for all of them. So we still have, the government still has multiple standing offers for other services, but it's replaced a couple of them. Professional services was one. We've recently added temporary services now managed through FlexTrack, as so is executive search as well.
Okay, thank you. How often are standing offer lists refreshed, or how often do you actively look for, or do you, I guess, actively look for new vendors if standing offer lists are existing?
So one of the benefits of the FlexTrack over the standing offers, so the answer to your first part of your question is standing offers generally go to market, we select and open up for vendors to join them, and then we lock them for a period of time, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. One of the benefits to the FlexTrack solution in the 4 areas that it covers is a vendor can join or choose to come out of that program at any time along that period of time. So the contract with FlexTrack is a 3 year. We've also extended for the 2 extension years, and this year we'll go back out to market for a FlexTrack-like solution. There are competitors to that program, but they'll be one of certainly one of the ones who will bid. But standing offers go for a fixed period of time. Vendors have to be on it from the beginning of the standing offer and remain on it for the period of the entirety of it. FlexTrack provided quite a considerably larger amount of flexibility for folks to get on and get off all the way through that 3 year process.
Okay, understood. What is there a benchmark or a standard that you folks at Procurement would try to adhere to in regards to, I guess, completing a standing offer process or an RFP process, or is it kind of fluid depending on what the task at hand is?
Sorry, maybe just to clarify, so do you mean, is there a standard sort of amount of time it would take us from the start to the end? It varies dramatically on if we've gone for a request like a tender, which is just a low price, and we'll select all the way through the complexity to the example earlier, an OPOR level of complexity has a first step, which would be an RFSQ or supplier qualification, through an RFP stage, through an evaluation, and then through a negotiation stage. So they can be lengthy, and it depends very much on the complexity of the product or the service that you're looking to purchase.
Okay, thank you. And my last one, there were awards referenced in the deputy's opening comments. I'm just wondering, it's not a hockey game you guys are playing, so what are they, and what's going on?
Mr. Conrad.
Maybe Mr. Mitchell and I can share this one. So yeah, we didn't win the Conn Smythe or anything like that. So we've been very privileged. We have, as I said earlier, we have wonderful staff in this organization who work very hard, are very professional about what they do. And I get the great honor of, on occasion, getting to stand up and take credit for all their hard work. So it's one of the privileges of my job. We were blessed. So last year, the Institute of Public Administrators of Canada runs a national award in combination with IBM on innovation in government. So last year we won the gold medal for Canada for the Trunk Mobile Radio System, which is the radio system that supports all of the government services, as well as fire departments and ambulances and ground search and rescues and others. So it's the most integrated radio system in North America, and we won the gold medal award last year for that. This year we were blessed to win the bronze level award from IPAC and Deloitte for our shared services initiative. So the shared service initiative of the government of Nova Scotia, which has realized now in excess of $50 million in savings over the 3 years, plus the other benefits, which are really significant in terms of what we've won. And just yesterday, we discovered actually that one of our information access and privacy staff has been shortlisted for the Deloitte IPAC Leadership Award nationally for the work that we've done on freedom of information processes and development. And Chris's procurement team has won 4 years in a row, I believe, an international procurement award awarded out of the U.S. So we're the only provincial government in the country to win that award, and we've won it 4 years in a row. And on Sandra's side, I believe there's at least 2 or 3 coming, but maybe you can talk a little bit about the technology one, Sandra.
Ms. Cascade.
Certainly. So we have also won an award for the work that we've done around the freedom of information and the technology systems that we've put in place around that.
Cleaning up. Pass it over to my colleague from Clare Digby.
Mr. Gordon Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. First, I actually want to thank my colleague to my right here for making the session interesting and adding some questions for me, believe it or not. He doesn't get that very often, I'm sure. My experience, and I want to delve into something we haven't touched on, is I was a manager with provincial government for some time and dealt with procurement on the managerial level, getting tenders out and cross-government. I'm sure it's a challenge, and I know that a lot of departments probably go to you for that information, but in a few different areas in that quickly, how do you interact with other departments to ensure that they're following proper protocol and implementing proper procedures in all of these various worlds that we have here for alternative and the direct procurement process?
Mr. Conrad.
So thank you for the question. There'd be a kind of wide range of processes. So obviously, fundamentally, you know, the policy documents that we've released are a key part of how departments know the work that requires to be done. Some of the material that's released in terms of the training programs for individual staff that go with that, whether that's, you know, a recent round of training on our technology solution we've implemented, which was called Ariba. Day-to-day supports from Chris's team, so people out there doing the work, calling into Chris's team to get technical advice and guidance. At my level, conversations as, you know, member of a steering committee or with my deputy colleagues around kind of the bigger, broader projects that we'd like to implement. I don't know, Chris, if you want to talk at
any level about the work your team does, which is tremendous in this area.
Mr. Mitchell?
I think maybe just as a short addendum to that, we work exclusively with the departments who bring the requirement for the procurement to us. So they are, the health authority included, they have the abilities below certain thresholds. Above those thresholds, they input their requirement through our SAP Ariba tool, and then we work with them to determine exactly what it is that they're looking for. We work with them to ensure that they understand the steps that they need to go through, the requirements for ministerial approvals for funding, et cetera. So there's a lot of work that goes in the front, captured under what we call a procurement plan, to ensure that they understand what it is, and more critically, to ensure that as the client department, they understand their role in the going forward. So that's from creating technical specifications to evaluating bid proposals that are received, et cetera. So it's very much a combined effort between the department who's looking to buy something and the ISD Procurement Services who's looking to support that.
Thank you. So in the world of exemptions for alternate procurement practices, those are reviewed on a fairly regular basis. So I've just a direct question first on that and then a follow-up on it. But how often are they reviewed and how are they reviewed for all the exemptions that you have?
Well, you caught me flat-footed about how often they are. The interesting thing about exemptions is they're for things that you just wouldn't necessarily tender for. So for example, you pay the power company, you're going to pay Nova Scotia Power, so there's an exemption. You're not expected to go to market for that, right? You have a magazine or a paper dropped off at the front, you're not expected to go to market for who you're going to buy the newspaper from. So the exemptions very much ebb and flow. So they'll stay in place provided that the service that you're looking to have exempted from a procurement continues to make sense, I guess, is the reality of it. So if there was a second power company and it was no longer a monopoly, then the exemption for Nova Scotia Power would no longer exist, and we would go to somewhere where we would tender for that.
Very good point. I'm glad you brought up Nova Scotia Power and the opportunity to open up, close off monopolies. So as these exemptions change then, that they do change, I would assume, the list of exemptions that would be there, those are rolled out to, it's your responsibility to roll those out to all of government?
From a policy perspective, yes. So we would make known what those exemptions are, correct.
Okay, thank you. I believe I only have approximately 4 minutes, 3 minutes. Where's the other finger? Okay. Just quickly on Axiom Assist. I heard a lot of good questions and a lot of good answers. Just a few things that I did want to follow up. You said that there was a fair amount of risk assessment that was done. Actually, you said there was a tremendous amount of risk assessment that was done on that system, and I know that it's complicated. It's certainly the crystal balls are not out there in that world at all, and I must say that you know, with the evolving world of technology, how you make these decisions, I'm sure, don't come lightly. How many people would have been involved in that risk assessment? Any idea roughly? This would be for Ms. Cascadden. Ms. Cascadden?
So I know we had multiple teams involved, certainly representing the health authority as well as the government. So we would have had representation from anyone who was using an existing system to ensure that the functionality of any of those existing systems would have been built into this one. I can't tell you exactly the number of teams, but as part of the package that I'll put together, it will include the risk assessment and people who were engaged in that. That was back about 3-4 years ago, so we have to dig for that information, but we will provide that information.
Thank you. So I would assume then your department would have taken the lead on that, and then it would have been subcommittees underneath of that?
That's correct, because we, as coming together as part of shared services, we are the lead for providing client services all across government and the health sector, and part of providing those client services, that's your service desk, your desktop support, your device support. This is the major tool that group needed. So because we provided those services, we needed the tool to enable us to provide the services, so we absolutely were the lead.
Exactly. And it's been 2 years, I believe. I didn't quite catch the date that since the implementation.
Yeah. We would say that it's between 1.5 and 2 years that we have implemented what we would consider the core functionality of the application, and now we're extending it into the other areas that are part of this service delivery model.
Okay, and quickly also, just a couple seconds. So, as part of the initial work that made you go in that direction was you had mentioned how the health authority had already been going down that hole. Do you know how much money they had invested in that at that point in time?
I don't off the top of my head, but I can certainly add that information to what we're asking for as well, what I'll provide you. Yeah.
Feedback from staff to date. Is there any ongoing with the effectiveness of it or within your own department?
So certainly, I would believe there's probably some mixed feedback. For those people who are at the service desk, the front line taking the calls, there's huge advantages to anyone who was on the health service desk because they had to work within 2 systems, within 2 screens, transferring information from one to another. They now can take the call and process the call, 1 system, 1 screen, and the infrastructure folks are struggling a little bit with this because they were so used to working in their own ticketing tool. But the problem with that is they were doing all of their work and the information wasn't getting back to the client that their problem was solved. So there was a break in our process. So our infrastructure people absolutely loved their own tools, but that isolated them from everyone else, and that's not the end-to-end services that we wanted to provide.
Order, the time has expired. I even let the answer go over the limit a little bit there, with my generosity towards Mr. Wilson. So with that, we will now allow Mr. Conrad to provide some closing comments.
Thank you very much. I wanted to, in response to the question about where we did the procurement session, so staff forwarded here, and I believe we said we were in Lunenburg, and in fact we were in Bridgewater. So just to correct the record. So we were in Halifax, Dartmouth, Sydney, Truro, Pictou, Bridgewater, Yarmouth, and Kentville so far. So those are the sites we've been at. Thank you all very much for the questions, for the dialogue this morning. We really appreciate the chance to be here. As I said a number of times, we have tremendous staff in our department. It's incredibly fulfilling for all of us as senior leaders to be working with this group of really committed people who work so hard on behalf of Nova Scotians. So it's a great privilege for us to come in here and talk about the great work that they do. So thank you very much for the time.
And thank you to all of you for answering our questions. Our next meeting is on November 1st. It is an in-camera meeting, and it is with the Auditor General to discuss the November 1st, 2017 Auditor Report of the Auditor General. It is also Take Your Child to Work Day. So if anybody wishes to do that, we do need to get agreement from the committee, given that the meeting is in camera, that any of those children that come to work with you or with anybody here, a staff member, understands that the meeting is in camera, and I do need to get the approval of the committee. So the question put to the committee is, are you okay with children attending that meeting should any member of the committee or a member of staff like to bring their child to work that day? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? So we have agreement on that. So is there any other further business to come before the committee? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.